Unknown Thought is made possible through the generosity of sponsors who care about people. IC Savings Bank, Ready Honda, and Corey's Clothiers. I am privileged again to have Malcolm Lester, the illustrious Canadian Jewish publisher, as my guest. Malcolm, you went to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati to become a Reform rabbi. You were also a founding member of the Spinoza Society. Do these two facts share causality?
I think they do. I've always been interested in philosophy, and my decision to become a rabbi really was to understand more what it meant to be Jewish philosophically or intellectually. The people that influenced me when I went to Hebrew Union College were people like Martin Buber, Abraham Heschel, Emil Fackenheim, Eugene Borowitz. And my reading of Spinoza, although I studied Spinoza in philosophy at the University of Toronto, my reading of Spinoza was rekindled in the early 90s when a number of us formed a reading club to read Spinoza's Ethics. So instead of reading current bestsellers, we decided to read philosophy, in particular the work of one philosopher, Baruch Spinoza.
What was the best thing about Spinoza? What did you love about him?
I liked the idea that he was searching for truth outside of religion. And there's a spirituality, a very deep spirituality in his philosophy that is not derived from organized religion, be it Judaism or Christianity. I like the idea that he used his intellect as a way to tapping those spiritual roots.
And what was most challenging for you about Spinoza?
Understanding him. He's a very difficult philosopher. He wrote in Latin. Many of the translations in English aren't very good. So what we would do is read aloud a particular passage and then discuss it amongst the members of the reading club.
And were you able to gain insight into yourselves by reading Spinoza?
I think we were able to gain insight into a very, very interesting mind of the 17th century. And trying to understand his insights, I think it sort of gave us insights into our own lives.
The most interesting insight I ever got from Spinoza was, among many, was that he refused to publish his work, which was, of course, deemed heretical, prior to his parents' death. He wouldn't publish until he knew they wouldn't be around to see him severely criticized.
In fact, there was only, I think, one of his works that was published in his lifetime under his name. That was his critique of Cartesian philosophy.
Right. So for those of us who wonder how a Jew lives as opposed to what a Jew writes, that would stand as a prime example of honor thy father and mother.
Absolutely.
And something to be seen. I've always been interested in revisiting Spinoza for a generation that may never have heard of Spinoza, may never know the man who's buried outside the cemetery in Amsterdam, may have no clue. What was the rejection of Spinoza based on?
We really don't know. And he was excommunicated in 1656. And the reasons for the cherem are never stated. The writ of excommunication heaps all sorts of curses and calumnies on him and banishes him from the city of Amsterdam or from living close to the Amsterdam synagogue. But the reasons for his heresy are never stated in the writ of excommunication, so we can only guess. My guess is that he was preaching ideas that not only went against the teachings of Judaism, but may have upset the broader Christian community in Amsterdam. The Jews of Amsterdam were relatively recent arrivals. Mainly, a lot of them came from Portugal, fleeing the Inquisition. And many of them were Marranos who practiced their Judaism in secret. So they were very, I think, concerned to be in the good graces, as it were, of the Amsterdam Christian community. And they might have felt that Spinoza was a troublemaker, an intellectual troublemaker, hence the reason for the banishment.
And Spinoza seems to have simply reached back and channeled Maimonides. Many of his works, the great Muslim theologians and even Aristotelian philosophy, and to the modern eye, he doesn't seem so out of whack. I mean, we're certainly exposed to a very large variety of thought and philosophy. Do you feel that Spinoza is more relevant today or less relevant than he was?
I think he's more relevant today. I think his idea of using geometry as a model may have been an attempt to achieve a kind of intellectual rigor that Euclidean geometry uses. He wrote his ethics based on the idea that there are various principles, propositions, corollaries, axioms, etc., that you can derive as to what is the ultimate nature of reality in the way that Euclid derived the truths of his geometry.
If you're speaking to a modern audience who are suspect of the incantation that they are constantly hit with about God, 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 how do you take Spinoza's foundations of logic and principles of realism and make it relevant for a modern generation so that they too can connect to God through a different channel, which is essentially, I think, what Spinoza was intimating?
He believed that there was only one substance in the universe, and that substance he called God, and that human beings are modifications or expressions of that one substance. And his argument is an attempt to show how that can happen. The ethics really is a book not just on how to live, but how you can see yourself as being part of the divine flux, the divine cosmos.
So every individual essentially is a part of the divine.
Correct.
So every human being and the values that we talk about, that everybody is equal and everybody is relevant and everybody has a place, everybody has a purpose, is essentially, by living that way, you're actually part of the divine creativity of creating the whole.
You are the part of the whole. We are a particular way each individual is a particular way God expresses himself. I'll use patriarchal language, but that's what Spinoza would say.
Spinoza sounds very modern. I wanted to go back to a question I asked you in a previous interview about where you link yourself on the scale of modernity versus traditional, in the sense that you want to live in the modern Judaism, and you say modern Judaism is a continuum, and as long as you continue along, you're part of modern Judaism. I've always told my congregation the most modern thing you could do is to make history and tradition relevant, because all the ideas are pretty much contained in history. My question for you is, if Spinoza is here and you're able to reach back and speak to the great philosophers of history, who is most influential in your modern view of Judaism and the world?
Well, I would say thinkers like Martin Buber and Abraham Heschel are very relevant. Emil Fackenheim also very relevant, particularly his writings on the Holocaust. And
you got a chance, obviously, to study with Martin Buber, and you're a friend of Emil Fackenheim.
I had him as a philosophy teacher and as a Sunday school teacher.
So you had quite a lot of contact. You're very fortunate in that way. I think that philosophy has sort of gone by the wayside for a young generation who we don't even get the opportunity to really think. We're sort of funneled into a belief system where we're expected to stay there. I know certainly that was my experience. In a few seconds that we have left, can you tell me about Emil Fackenheim and his 11th commandment?
The 11th commandment being, thou shalt never forget the Holocaust.
That's right.
Well, I found his teachings and his thinking on the Holocaust quite profound, and the kind of novum that the uniqueness of the Holocaust for the Jewish experience was to me very deep.
He's certainly been quite influential in my thinking of the 11th commandment. Malcolm, once again, thank you so much for your deep and rich insight, and hopefully young Jewish men and women will take their inspiration from your thoughts and feelings on modern versus traditional Judaism. Thank you.
You're welcome.